Thank you, Nick, for this very intense and interesting presentation. Just to maybe say a few comments about that. Indeed, we try to interconnect our research with SAGNIC because I'm working myself on health issues and epidemic of infectious diseases. And we can see many common things happening. First of all, the role of urbanization in the spread of mosquitoes and exposures of people to new diseases or diseases we thought to be controlled. So urbanization is really at the core of this, let's say, risk, etc. But urbanization in itself is not doomed to impact people's health. As you say, if the state is providing infrastructures, we can reduce the risk at any level. So this is one good message. And by interconnecting this research, what we have to do is that, okay, climate change is impacting pollution, is impacting urbanization and health of population exposures to epidemic. If you are acting on that, you're not only able to control climate change, but you might control pollution and improve health of population. It's a very positive message thing, but it's not really being done right now. We are still working on silos. We are working on health. My neighbor will work on pollution, etc. We need more and more platforms that can integrate social sciences with other sciences, trying to study how urbanization can impact other factors, etc. So, unfortunately, that's not the way we are going right now. There is fewer and fewer funding for creation of platforms that allow discussion between researchers and trying to connect our research together. So this is a strong message that we need to spread. Create such findings. We need to interconnect our researchers all over the world, not only in France, but as well in India, etc. We can see several common aspects. As I say, you cannot control epidemic of dengue in Delhi if you don't control epidemics in Gurgaon, Ghaziabad, in Kolkata, in France, etc. So it's really underlying the fact that our destiny is highly linked to each other, and we have to work really in a global system, but as well at a very local level. So we'll stop here. Maybe I guess we have several questions. I would request you to introduce yourself for SAGNIC to know who you are. Yeah, one here.
I'm Sanjay Yadav. I'm an independent author. I've written a book also on the environmental crisis of Delhi. A couple of points I disagree with. You say our urbanization plans have no, air pollution plans, but I think this is not. I'd like to know how you say this, because India is notorious for having too many departments which do no work. The problem is not so much the lack of a department or a plan for this or that, but the lack of execution and implementation on the ground. Take the Yamuna cleanup. It's not about air pollution, but it's about the Yamuna, where millions have been spent since 1994. But recently it was found that the Yamuna today is dirtier, more polluted than what it was 20 years ago, after spending millions of rupees. So the problem is not of not having a department or a plan, but of very poor governance and very poor implementation and execution. And sometimes even the plans are terrible. And an example of a notorious IIT plan was the BRT corridor, where hundreds of millions were spent first to install it, and then so many hundreds of millions to dismantle it. So sometimes the plans too are terrible. The science can be quite poor. So I disagree with you on the issue of not having enough plans. And then you spoke of awareness. Well, you agree a lot of awareness exists in Delhi, and yet Delhi is so polluted. Why aren't the plans? Why doesn't awareness in itself produce results? So I'm not sure awareness is to be blamed. And then the other point about Delhi is, to which you've not alluded, is migration. And there can be a lot of factors, but every place doesn't have the same cause. Here we've got huge waves of people coming from the east, and about 10 million people from Bihar and the Bhojpur region. That creates the pressure of human activity. More dust, more transportation, more the destruction of the green cover. So migration is a big issue in Delhi, to which you've not alluded. So these are a couple of points, I think. With you.
So quickly to answer you, so the first point, what I meant by air pollution plan is mostly the intersectoral plan. I fully agree the bigger problem or bigger challenge is actually the execution. But what I meant by these plans is that most of the plans are made at city scale or even at smaller, as you mentioned, like BRT, so very specific sector of the city. What I meant by air pollution mitigation plan is basically kind of an intersectoral regional plan. Still today we are struggling to have an interstate dialogue. You know, all these states, they do not talk to each other. And when I say intersectoral plan, we really need to integrate at least 15 or 16 ministries together. Then only we can have really long-term plan. And the second point what you mentioned, this awareness, I think in Delhi, I mean, my thinking was that if there is enough awareness, then there will be enough political pressure to act upon. Because very clearly, if you see today, environmental challenges are not anywhere in the political agenda. Even in this election also, nobody talked about any environmental problem. So unless there is a political pressure to deliver, I mean, I mostly talked about air pollution, but I fully agree, air, water pollution and all. I mean, something has been done, but really there is no pressure from public and nothing like that. So that's what I meant by awareness. I think it's a long way to go. Still today, no political party thinks that we need to really clean our environment. And the third point, sorry, I forgot. What was your third point?
It is about migration and,
Yep. Yeah, so yeah, those are actually interesting things. That's what I'm saying. Even from the scientific perspective, also that there has been huge migration of people to this urban center, and that is continued to increase.
Trans-regional migration, not migration from within the Yamuna basin, but beyond the Yamuna.
Yeah, so we are actually
Trans-regional, transcontinental almost.
Yeah, so we are actually currently doing a study on that to understand because of these interstate or inter-country migrations, how the burden is changing. Because when the way you talk about this air pollution and its burden, imagine people moving from Bihar to Delhi. Because as I mentioned, the background disease rate is also key when you calculate the burden or attribute. So the people who are moving to a new place, their exposure changes, their background disease rate also changes. So these are all very complex social problems for which actually we yet do not have full answers. And I fully agree that that's what actually the social science meant to do. Thank you.
I am Sagar. I've been, a water specialist. So you have described your, thesis very well. But you have missed the point that, water bodies and, different type of trees, plantations, they make some, and when the particles move, whether it is water or, air, it automatically gets some sort of, dissected, or the chemical reaction takes place because of night or because of day or because of more CO2 to CO3, and then it becomes ozone and carbon is dissociated. So there is a full chemistry of air pollution which needs to be looked upon, and water bodies are to be created, plantation has to be created, so that there are trees which give 24 hours oxygen. So you have not mentioned all those. Those are very easily available. If you are studying part of science and you make it.
Excuse me, do you have a question?
Yeah. So your thesis doesn't show the entire topography of the particles while they are moving or they are stagnating, or any horticulture effect on that.
No, I could not because of the time constraint and all, and I only focused on particulate matter, not ozone and other chemistry, because of the time constraint.
Okay, so I have three small questions.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh yes, sorry. I'm Olga Shpilyanskaya. I'm a consultant on sustainable urban development in Asian cities with a focus on climate resilience. So three sets of questions. The first one is I was quite surprised to see a slide that the pollution levels are so different within the scope of a few kilometers. Can you comment on this, please? Technically, how exactly that works? So that's one. My second one is on, again, another data which was surprising for me, not being an expert in the field, is the contribution of the household emissions to the total PM 2.5, and I wonder whether the same ratios apply to cities, or is this really a rural thing altogether, this map? And the third one is on the, you very briefly mentioned the national clean air program. If you could please comment on it, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's reaching us anywhere?
Okay, so first the spatial heterogeneity what you talked about, it is controlled by the microclimate, local pollution sources, because what happens is that typically if you have this urban infrastructure where you have high-rise building, the roads and all, the wind patterns also changes. So all these microclimate things are playing a major role in having this heterogeneity. And that's why, so there are a lot of studies that people have shown in Europe and US that if you move from the highways, for example, there is a typical gradient, the pollution level starts decreasing. But those are mostly, valid in the countryside settings where you have this highways going and then you have very homogeneous things, but not in urban areas because of this urban building structure and so on. So that is one point. The second, what you said is that household emissions. It was really astonishing actually, because you think that, household emissions don't contribute much, but there are, not our studies, but there are 7 independent studies in the last 10 years which came to the same conclusions, that the household emissions have the highest contribution to ambient air in India, although the estimates vary depending on what emission inventory you are using, what model you are using. But the conclusions remain same. Yes, if you look into the rural regions, actually, this number is almost 60 to 70%. That means in the rural areas, the household emissions are controlling the ambient air mostly. So if you clean household, your ambient air will clean. In the urban areas, what we found is that this number is slightly lower. If you talk about Delhi, within Delhi, very few people are actually using solid fuel. But then people in Punjab and Haryana in the upwind sides, there is massive use of this. So that pollution is actually getting transported to Delhi. So even in Delhi also, if you see this number, the contribution of household emissions, it's not just the emission within the city, but in the upwind areas are transported to Delhi. And then the third question is your National Clean Air Action Plan has been launched with an attempt to meet Indian standard. And so what they identified is that there are 102 non-attainment cities. So 102 cities have been identified which do not meet Indian standards, and each of these cities have been asked to develop an air quality management plan. But what is lacking here is that it's a good start in my opinion, but there is no sort of time-bound specific targets. And that's what my problem is, that you should set target, which has been there for Delhi. For example, in Delhi by 2020, we are implementing this Euro 6 fuel to cut down vehicular emissions by significant fractions. So such plan is required for the other cities also. You cannot just have a plan saying that, okay, let's target to reduce pollution. What is the target? Are you talking about reducing by 50%, 80%, and what is that deadline? So that is currently missing in the National Clean Air Action Plan. But I think, this is a new initiative, and hopefully when these cities started, so I just want to mention, so we are starting this project for Pollution Control Board to actually have this satellite-based pollution mapping for the country, and we'll put all the data in an interactive web page. So that people can actually look into their city, their district, their state, what has happened in the past, and then as the satellites continue giving us data, we'll keep on updating. So all these initiatives are being started, and I think hopefully in 5 years, we'll see some change. And
but the daily integrated action plan, if that's what you're referring to, I think that only gets activated when the pollution level reaches 300 plus. So it doesn't have a long-term action.
No, that is what I'm saying. So under this National Clean Air Program, long-term actions has been requested. But again, there is still a lot of confusion even within this city administrations, and what does this long-term action plan mean? That's what I'm saying. When you talk about long-term action plan, there is no sort of target. It's just that, okay, let us try to reduce it.
So what do they put inside? Do they put like a list of measures? You could do this, you could do
Yes,
that?
exactly. You should.
Is it municipalities? Is it
Yes, so it should be implemented by the local municipalities under the aegis of state government. Yeah. Yeah, so they have to
Control mechanism at the national level on what the cities do, how they report?
define. The norms are defined, well defined. But again, the challenge here is actually, what he was asking in the beginning also. In India, the biggest problem is the implementation. For many of these things, solutions have been provided, but when it comes to implementation, it has not been implemented properly. And that's where actually the challenge lies.
Myself, Gopal Sarup architect. See, you showed in the Delhi plan. See, I'm looking one thing, that the airport of Delhi is very near to Dwarka.
No, the writing may be there.
No.
I think it's a station. Yeah, it's the name of the station rather than the location.
See that slide? Since Delhi airport is very near to Dwarka, and you are showing that Dwarka is the least polluted.
Relatively cleaner. Within Delhi, yes.
It means there is no pollution because of
No. Don't think less polluted does not mean there is no pollution.
Just see here.
No.
So it's
See,
really strange,
no, it's not
The
strange
airport is
actually.
here.
See, within this scale it looks strange, but even still this number is 70, around 70.
Because I think that is the Chanakyapuri is the least polluted, I think so.
No, there are some hot spot, local spot. For example, here if you see the values are 60-65 microgram per meter cube at annual scale.
By the way, is this an annual average?
This is annual of 2015 only.
Because that's very low compared to, because I'm following the QR on a regular basis.
Yep.
I don't see such.
No, I mean it depends on which actually sites. For example, if you take what is called this Anand Vihar, your values are very high because that's a kind of local hotspot. Yeah. But don't get actually confused seeing this map because these numbers are almost double than the Indian standard. I mean, within the context of Delhi, this is a relatively cleaner place.
Because there is no impact of this thing also. The southern region, the northern region here. They cannot see any impact.
What impact you are talking about?
See, near civil lines, there is this northern ridge, and near Mandir Marg, Pusa, there is southern ridge. So there is no impact on that because they are, it is known as the lungs of Delhi.
There are variations. There are variations, year by year variations. And this is just 1 year. Then in some other years, as I said, this depends on the local microclimate, how the source characteristics are changing. If the new roads are coming, traffic pattern changes from 1 year to another year, you will see different. But in general, what we have noticed over last 18, 19 years, what is very certain is that eastern part of Delhi is more polluted than the western part of Delhi.
The second thing is, since because of the Prime Minister policy, that the open defecation is now non-reduction. Will there be this thing also pollution reduction because of that?
Difficult to tell, but nobody has looked into it.
I said nobody will do
Good afternoon. My name is Paulina Lopez. I'm associate researcher at CSH. So thank you very much for this nice presentation. It's very interesting. So I have a question about the methodology because I think I didn't understand some things. In the previous, if you can go to the previous slides, where you show about the satellite imaging and so on. So I have one question: is how did you manage with the cloud coverage? Because it's, if you use optical images,
So there are a lot of data gaps actually, especially you are correct actually. Vertical distribution is fine because it's an active remote sensing setup.
But here I have another question because again, if you have a cloud coverage or whatever, then it will be scattering then. So then
Active remote sensing you can use even in cloudy conditions, but yes, your uncertainty is larger. when clouds is present. But yeah, for passive remote sensing, when you are retrieving this columnar aerosol optical depth, yeah, you are not getting actually the value. So there are some data gaps which you are trying to fill by spatial interpolations.
Okay, so yeah, then at the end you use a kind of let's say an average or whatever. You took maybe pixels from several images and then you compose something, or how did you manage?
So this is basically yeah. So the analysis of whatever data actually, how many images, because the satellite teams actually process the aerosol optical depth data for in a gridded format, and then we took it from there and then we apply our own algorithm. What we do is that when you look into the gridded data, whatever pixels are missing exactly because of the cloud cover, we try to fill the gap using spatial interpolations, looking into the spatial gradient of aerosol optical depth.
We can take one or two last question. What time you have to leave?
I think
So one here. Hi, I'm Milil.
Sure.
I'm a field student aspirant. My question was, as we know, the government has introduced the BS6 norm in Delhi. Do you think it's a good idea to BS6 in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities?
it has to be, yes. I fully agree, because BS6 is expected to reduce vehicular emissions by at least 40%. I don't see why it cannot be, but only challenge I think in implementing it in Tier 2, Tier 3 cities is that we have to take actually automobile industry on board, which cannot just implement like that. But I think under NCAP probably if we can demonstrate, because there is also an apprehension like how much it will improve the situation. People have done some calculations, especially the Terry group, that if you implement BS6, how much the vehicular emissions will come down in Delhi and how much that will clean up Delhi's air. So based on that exercise, if you think about this Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, yes, in my opinion, we should implement that.
One more question. What do you think is the solution for, you mentioned that the outwind region from agricultural activities in Haryana and Punjab region, particularly in winter season here. So is there any solution for that?
No, already the solution has been provided, because we know why they are burning. It's not also the faults of the farmers, because they are forced to burn this agricultural crop stable. You need to understand, because there is a very small time window for them to clear the agricultural field before the wheat agriculture starts. So during the monsoon they sow rice, and as soon as it is over, there is only a 2-week time gap before they have to prepare for wheat cultivation. And what happened actually in 2009, Punjab government has implemented this Subsoil Water Preservation Act. So they tried to maximize the use of groundwater for the 2 cultivation seasons. And that is why the gap has reduced. And there is very less gap for the farmers. So for them actually it's cheaper and easier to clear the field by burning. But now with sustained program, if you see the last year's data, there has been a reduction, 20% reduction in crop burning. So I don't see any reason why it cannot be completely mitigated in the next 3 to 4 years.
Behind, and then Samuel.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Gaurav and I'm a designer, and I'm working on developing a documentary on certain aspects of pollution. I have 2 general questions. Your presentation shows me that your projections are not looking very good for a long time to come, and it's no fault of Delhi. You can do whatever in the sense in Delhi. So my question is, you also have some data on the pollution levels inside the house as compared to outside the house? This is the first question. And the second question is, how does the general public deal with this, like in the house, and then all the other people who are working outside, the rickshawalas, the people who are working, how do they deal with this craziness? What do they do?
Yeah.
Poor people, what can they do?
They cannot. That is the problem actually. They cannot do any. You have to work. You have to be exposed. Yeah. So that is why the only way to handle this situation is cut down emissions. Several things have been tried. Even in Delhi, people are talking about putting giant this vacuum, some technology, this, that. But these are all short-term solutions. This will not going to help us in long run. We have to have a clear-cut strategy of transforming into using cleaner fuels, cutting down emissions from all possible sources. And see, the problem here is that, many sources, if you look into the industrial, just look around Delhi NCR region, there are so many small-scale industries for which there is absolutely no idea how much they are polluting, how much they are emitting. When people develop these emission inventories, it's very hard. All the eateries, this, that. And all these small-scale, medium-scale industries are supposed to have very stringent emissions norms and all. But nobody knows whether they're... Because what happens is that when people go there and try to see, that day probably they switch off, they're not using. Even the brick kiln, another classic example. Huge pollution source. You just move outside Delhi, you see these clusters of brick kiln in Punjab and Haryana. They're supposed to use some controls, but they're not doing it.
Most of the industries in Delhi are closed. Whatever you are seeing is non-emission industry, and there is a big, industrial, they are shifted to the other places, and industry is not there in Delhi.
No, industry not in Delhi, but there are a lot of these, in the upwind sides.
Even the coal power plants.
No, power plants are not there now.
Are closed.
No.
It's been closed completely, or is it on and off?
Inside Delhi, it's closed actually.
Everything is closed.
But
Individual level,
Are there any nearby? Or?
In NCR area.
You can't produce anything in Delhi.
Yeah, the problem that then you shift it to 20
You can't
kilometers.
have furnace.
no, that is the thing. No, that's what I'm saying. That's where the challenge comes for intersectoral plan, because what the latest work has been suggested that Delhi's pollution 50% is contributed by outside, and then we are not in any dialogue with this regional, with other states like Punjab and Haryana. So,
More than focus point.
huh?
CPCB is there for that. CPCB, Central Pollution Control.
What? I mean, CPCB does not have any power to do anything.
I think there is some.
Bhulan was there.
They do not have any legal power, let me tell you. I've been working closely with CPCB. Government, see, CPCB cannot force Punjab government or Haryana government to, reduce emission from sectors. As simply, they can initiate the dialogue. That's what the point is.
There were discussions on the crop burning, isn't it?
Crop burning is now being handled maturely. And I think in 3 to 4 years, crop burning will go down drastically. That's definitely going to happen. But other sectors I'm talking about, brick lanes, DG sets. Diesel generator sets is such a big pollution source in India. Because telecom sectors, all housing, they have this 24-hour the DG sets running and all these things. So there are many complex things we can keep on discussing.
Samuel, I think it would be the last question. One more? No, it's okay. Last question for you, Samuel.
Okay, so my name is Samuel. I'm a PhD in geography in CSH. So thank you for the presentation. It was really fascinating. I had also a methodological question about the model you introduced from aerosol data to shift to PM2.5. As you said, there is no ground data for rural areas. So how did you ensure that your model was reliable enough to be spatially interpolated to the whole India, which is constituted a lot of rural areas without this validation data?
Yeah, so whatever our bias correction is definitely based on the data in urban areas, and assumption here is that you have similar bias over rural areas, but you are correct. As of now, we do not have any data to really say how much uncertainty, or whether the uncertainty will be different in the rural areas, at least from our model. The project what I mentioned for CPCB, what I am starting, one of the objectives there is that under this National Clean Air Program, CPCB is going to expand their network programs. And in coming years, actually, there will be some rural monitoring also. because that's what has been discussed, and then only we can actually clearly say how much is the uncertainty in the rural areas. Yeah.
Okay, thank you once again, Sagni, for your very fascinating presentation. And see you soon. Thank you.